Back before Google, LinkedIn, and cell phones, I stumbled on recruiting. I always knew I wanted to create a recruiting firm that created an incredible candidate and client experience while allowing me, as well as my team, an opportunity to live an abundant life on our own terms, to have the freedom to work where, when, and how we want, and to be rewarded financially for a job well done. It has been a long, sometimes messy marathon, but wow, have I learned a lot about recruiting, branding, sales, scaling, leadership, overcoming challenges, and most importantly, overcoming myself. I absolutely love our industry, and this podcast is for you, my fellow recruiters ready to learn, grow, and push yourself to your next level. Let's do this together. We are talking about all things recruiting. All right, welcome to another episode of All Things Recruiting, and I have a great guest with me, Brian Dallman. I am so glad that you are on. So thank you
Thanks.
for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, and Brian is our Director of Client Development here at the Finders. So Brian, I thought, we kind of did this last minute and we thought like this would be so good to come on and talk about just the whole idea of going independent for recruiters. So going from working in an agency or working in corporate and making that big decision and kind of having that idea of, you know what, maybe there's something different. I love recruiting, but maybe there's a different way to go about it. So I thought, who else, who would be a better person to come on and share that journey than you? Because you did exactly that years and years ago before it was even kind of as common as it is now. So yes, thank you for hopping on with me.
Yeah,
And
happy to do it.
yeah, so all right, so tell our audience, how did you get started in recruiting?
I've heard a lot of your podcasts. People share their story, and I'm like most of them. I fell into it. I went to school for accounting. Got an accounting degree. I was an accountant for 5 years. And when I moved back out to Phoenix in 2005, I went to Robert Half to help find me an accounting job. And they offered me a job internally. And so I've been doing this ever since and worked at a few different places, definitely some better than others, but I've loved getting into recruitment. Um, there's so much fulfillment in it. It does pay well, but deeper than that, just helping people. It's been a great ride for the last 20 years, and I'm excited to be here and now working with the Finders. So.
Yeah. Was that hard for you? Because I have seen this trend more lately where people are actually doing the job. So, like, you started out in accounting and then decided to switch. Like, how did that happen, really? And, like, because usually some of the skill sets that require you to be a great accountant don't, some of it definitely translate, but there's some
hmm
pieces maybe that might not translate into recruiting, especially sales. So how did
Yeah.
you figure out like accounting maybe wasn't your thing and that recruiting would be more in line with what you wanted to do?
Yeah, interesting you asked that. My wife, when I told her I was offered this position, I wanted to do it 20 years ago. She was 6, 7 months pregnant with our first child, and she thought she was going to give birth under a bridge somewhere because
Oh gosh.
I was an accountant, right? I'm not a sales guy. I'm very different today than I was 20 years ago from a personality standpoint, and yeah, she was terrified. Now she wanted to support me and she encouraged me to do it, and so I've always given her a lot of credit for that. But she was terrified. She thought our son was going to be born in a cardboard box, under a bridge somewhere because we would be homeless.
No, was it
Um,
tax season? That's the thing.
no, it was September when I started.
Okay.
So no, not
So,
quite tax
okay,
season.
not, yeah, that's good.
No, but after doing accounting for 5 years, it's you just sit at your desk and you're punching in a keyboard. I was doing some accounting, I was doing some financial analysis work in there, and I learned pretty quick. It's very monotonous. It wasn't exciting. It was boring, I thought, and so I knew, okay, this long term is not what I wanted to do. And so when I had this opportunity, I was terrified too because I never thought I would be a salesperson. Whether you're on recruitment or the actual sales side, I've told so many people you're doing sales. And
Mhm.
so having to sell to companies or having to sell positions to candidates, that was not me. But I've never been afraid to try new things. And so I gave it a try. And 20 years later, I've had some good success. And here I am doing a podcast about it.
I know, I love that. So, okay, so and I know that you had a great agency run, and that's how you and I met. I think it was probably
Yes.
like over 10 years ago or
It-
something like that.
yeah.
And I think it's really interesting because you never know when you meet someone, the timing, like timing aligns at different, you have no control over what might happen in the future. So I
Yeah.
remember when we met, I'm like, Brian is definitely the type of person that I would want to work alongside. And so when this came up, just within the last year, it was just like the stars aligned and it was perfect timing. So
Yes.
how did you go from, being W-2, because I always, when I talk to people, there's definitely pros and cons of being W-2 and being independent. Like they definitely have pluses and things that are more challenging. But what made you decide at that period, which I think was maybe like 20, like, was it like 7 years ago, something like
Yeah.
that?
2017 is when I made that transition from traditional agency to
Yeah.
my own business and this model.
Yeah.
That was definitely a big leap of faith and a new step for me because now I have four kids. Fast forward all those years, it wasn't my first one, and I had had a lot of success in agency recruiting. I've made a lot of money and I've provided a good living, a good environment for my family. So to step out and walk away, again, my wife was going back to that point where, great, we're going to live under a bridge, and it's like, hey, but I've got a track record now, right? I've been doing this for 12 years. I can
Yeah.
have success, and I will have success in this. So the confidence of my past, being knowing that I can do this job, definitely helped in that. I think for somebody brand new who's never done recruitment, this model it'll be overwhelming because not only are you learning how to work within the confines of independent model, brokerage firm, just being independent, you've got to learn how to recruit on top of all those things. And this model, I think, is not necessarily conducive to learning how to recruit. But if you're confident in your abilities, I feel like anybody can make this transition over. And there's some other intangibles I think you need to have that I'm sure we'll talk about, through the
Hmm.
podcast. But I was ready in my career. I wanted something bigger than what I had been doing, and owning my own business, getting to choose what I work on, what markets I work in, who I get to work with. It made sense.
Yeah.
You learn a lot over the years when you do this, and as you know,
Yeah.
um, and it's nice being able to say, I'm not good in that area. Don't put me there.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, and I forgot
yeah,
about that because you went off and you started your own company, right? How
yes,
is that? Like what? Because how long it was a kind of a shorter amount of time, right? Was
yes.
it like under a year-ish
Less than a
or
year. I had an
yeah.
investor that was going to help me build a business up in Seattle because of my non compete here in Phoenix.
Hmm.
And long story short, they ended up going out of business, and so I wasn't able to continue building that. I didn't have the resources to do that on my own, and so that's when I moved over into this brokerage model where I still own my own business. I was not aware that this model existed at the time, um, but the stars aligned, whatever you want to say. Things worked out, and I got into this brokerage model 7+ years ago now, and I think it was a good transition going from my own business to this because I didn't really have a choice. I know I don't want to go back to agency, the traditional agency, and
Right.
so the benefits of traditional agency with the benefits of owning my own business, this was a perfect match.
Right. Yeah. What came up? Because I know there are people on here that are just starting their own firm and not going to a brokerage model, or they might be in an agency and they're wondering what their options are. So when you started your own, business from scratch, what were a couple things that came up for you unexpectedly that you didn't realize, going from an agency to like on your own?
I forgot how hard it is going into a brand new market. When I got into recruitment in 2005, I was with Robert Half, and nobody cares about my name when you're at Robert Half. They care about Robert Half. They care about the brand, and there's good and bad with that. But over the years, I had to start over a few times with new agencies, but I had a network that I could bring in being in Phoenix. And probably the hardest thing when I started my own firm is I had a very strict non-compete, and I wanted to honor that and respect that. And so I couldn't do anything in Phoenix within 50 miles. So it was literally starting from scratch in a brand new market. I forgot how tough that was. Not being able to bring in even one candidate, one contact, and so that was tough. But then also trying to find good people in a market I didn't know proved to be a little bit tough. It took a lot of time to just screening good people that I wanted to be in my firm. And that was also challenging. So you've been doing this for 25 plus years, and you've had a lot of great people come through. So I have a lot of respect for you because you keep doing it and you find good people. And that's a challenge that I did not anticipate. I'm like, yeah, people want to work and be independent, be of something great. But it's hard to get people to walk away from what they know.
And it's still challenging after all these years. And
Yes.
I think that's why I love it so much. Like you talked about, it's definitely never boring in
No,
recruiting.
it is not.
It's the opposite. It's like a roller coaster. But no, that's awesome. What do you feel, like when we are talking about, independent people that want to go and perhaps join like a brokerage model like ours is now, like there's certain characteristics that are,
Mhm.
I think are better for an independent opportunity versus like a W-2 opportunity. So what do you feel, because you've been on all sides of things, like what do you feel like that someone needs to be able to really um, embrace when they're either going to go independent or start their own, firm for that matter, or join like a
Mhm.
brokerage?
Yeah, I think two things that play a huge part into anybody being successful. First off, it's an intangible skill set of being self-driven, self-motivated. You no longer have an office of people who are pushing you. You don't have this boss standing over you saying, "How many calls did you make today? How many touch points did you have? How many visits did you have? How many screens?" Like, there is none of that. You are your own boss, and I think a lot of people really struggle with that. They find it harder to be successful within that because you know you've got to wake up and get going in the morning at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whatever your normal time is. You can't just sleep until 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock now just because you don't have a traditional boss. You've got to stay focused. You can't just go out to lunch with your friends. You can't just go run chores. My wife is she still does it a lot. She's like, "Hey, let's go to the store with me or go do this." And I'm like, "No, I gotta work. I've got meetings." So it's so easy to get pulled away. It's so easy to get distracted. And I think you've got to have that self motivation, be self driven, be able to manage yourself, be able to create boundaries for yourself, so that you can continue working in a model where nobody is standing over you telling you what to do. So that's a big thing that I don't know that you can teach that. You either have that or you don't. I think you can learn it over time, but that's a tough one. But then the other thing is having a brand for yourself, knowing who you are, what do you want to be known for. And when I first got into this model, I struggled with that some. I stepped into a new business, and one of my colleagues said, "Hey, don't be afraid to branch out, do new things, go into new markets, new lines of business." And so I thought this is what I was supposed to do when I came into this model. And instead of doing what I know, which was tech or accounting and finance, I started just going anywhere and everywhere. Like, hey, I know this company has used in the past with somebody that's been in my network, so let me call them. And you just get pulled into so many different directions. You're going to beat yourself up because the success won't be there. And it's like, man, I've had all this success. Why am I not being successful right now? Because I didn't have a brand. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And whether that brand looks like a specific niche or it's just, I'm going to be the best tech recruiter in Phoenix. It doesn't have to be, so specific. There's a lot of success when you have a specific niche, but it doesn't have to be that. But you have to have a brand. Know what you want to do. So what I tell people, you've got to have that roadmap, right? You got to know where you want to go so that a map can get you there. And if you don't know where you want to go, you don't know what you want to be, how are you ever going to get there? So those are probably the two biggest things in this model. Be self-motivated, self-driven, manage yourself, and have your own brand. Know who you want to be known, what you want to be known for.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think that there are tools, like we talk about that in our weekly meetings. There's
Mm-hmm.
certain tools that, I mean, I use to this day. In fact, yesterday, and I've talked about this before, but I have a notepad and I literally jot down every 15 minutes what I'm doing in my day because
Mm-hmm.
it changes. And over time, it's not even that you relax and start going into bad habits, but you can look at it if you really do this, loyally for at least a couple weeks. And I do it probably every quarter. I just do it for myself. So it's like I
Yeah.
have to discipline myself and go, and I don't waste time. I don't feel like I waste time. I don't do it on purpose. I don't go and just, go shopping or anything
Right.
like
Right.
that. If anything, I have to tell myself to stop working. But, maybe it's a phone call that happens. Like my son will call, which I
Yep.
always take. But then I'm like, okay, I need to make sure that, I'm talking, getting it resolved, telling him I'll call him back or whatever. But it's about timing because you can look and you can be in a task. You can be writing an email or something comes up and you're researching and it's work related, but you don't realize like how much time you're spending on it. And I can look up and it'll be like 20 minutes that I wrote an email and I'm like, okay, this can be condensed. Like I need to be quicker,
Yes.
So if
Yeah.
you're timing yourself and you're writing down like every 15 minutes, like what am I doing? And
Yeah.
is this best usage of my time or can I either delegate it or do it later? Like I know I've talked about that before, or just don't do it. So I do think that there's tools, and I think anyone listening, they have to, you have to constantly kind of be
Yeah.
micromanaging yourself.
Yes.
I've even done things where I have like a little timer, like the little sand things on my desk, where I give myself a certain amount of time to get something done. Because Parkinson's law, like we will take as much time as we're allowed to do something, just human
Yes.
nature. So if we condense that, like, business development, like we talk about call blocking, like
Yeah.
doing it, religiously and also doing it as quickly as possible because you can probably get twice as much done in an hour than you might be doing right now. So,
Yeah.
I definitely, to your point, if you don't have that innate ability and self drive to want to do that, your production, if you're going from like a W-2 to an independent, your production could definitely slide. You have to
Yeah.
kind of monitor yourself.
And it's
It, yeah.
Yeah, it's not all bad things. Yeah, like what you said. I mentioned going shopping. My wife's like, "Hey, let's go do this. Let's go grab lunch. It'll turn into a 3 hour lunch and whatever." It's just checking your personal email. And you get sidetracked on that. For me, I've got two dogs, and I've got to close my office door sometimes because one of them's going to come in with the ball and they want to play, and it's so easy to get distracted. And to your point with work, it's like work stuff happens and your email. I guess what I'm trying to say is everybody, you got to know yourself, and then knowing yourself, put in parameters that work for you. I don't believe this is a cookie cutter business, and one process isn't something that's going to fit everybody. So you've got to be willing and able to have that hard self realization, with yourself, and say, I struggle in this area, so I need to put this into place. Let me go talk to somebody who can maybe help me with this. Let me find somebody who can hold me accountable. I know that's something you and I talk a lot about, and I love you when I give you my goals and you write them down. It's because I know you're going to follow up with me and hold me accountable. And it sucks sometimes. It's like, yeah, I missed it this week, but at the same time, we need that, and those are things that I love with this model. Again, kind of getting ahead of myself a little
Yeah.
bit, but with this model, because we have a team of people around us, you get all these benefits of being independent, but you have people around you that can also hold you accountable. And so that's one of the great things, again, with this model. So not to move ahead onto another question or anything on you,
Yeah,
but
no, I think that's such a good point because that is some of the advantages of being in a brokerage model. And if, our listeners don't understand or don't know kind of what that is, it's basically like you are, and jump in here, Brian, too, like to add to this, but you're basically like your own business. You usually,
yes,
like I usually suggest everyone to have their own LLC, and they're building their business. At least that's what the finders, what we're
yep,
doing is we're really supporting and mentoring and helping other people run their own business within the walls of the finders. So
absolutely,
they get to pick their niche and their brand, like what do they want to be known for.
hmm,
And we have a team of people that are just passionate and want to, succeed, and they're drivers, and we're supporting each other and holding each other accountable. Like I need that too, which is why
yeah,
I love, some of our optional meetings that we get together 2 or 3 times a week. And it's like I'm holding myself accountable, but I also like speaking it to a team of people,
yes,
because then it's out there and then you're like, oh yeah, like there was a couple weeks ago, I think I wanted to look at MetaView, and that was one of my intentions of the week. And on Friday, I realized as I was talking to the rest of our team, I was like, you know what? I didn't look into that, but I still have all day today to get
yep.
it done.
Still
So
got
it's
you got 24 hours.
yeah. So it's things like that where you can work independently, but you're still part of a team, and you have people, even like, I love seeing people have a great month because I'm still, doing business development. So I still have, I'm still running my desk, and I love hearing some of our other team members have great success and great months because it fuels, everyone, and including
Yeah.
me, to get going.
Yeah,
you
and
know?
this is you talk about having your own niche. We talked about having, whatever market that you want to work in. Like most of my career has been in Phoenix, but I've branched out the last 7, 8 years into other markets. But even contract versus perm recruitment, I've worked at companies where I can only sell contract or I can only sell perm. And if I bring in something contract, I got to give it to the contract people, even though it's my relationship. But those are things, again, I've worked with people who are phenomenal contract recruiters. I've worked with people who are, $1 million billers on perm side, which is hard to do, but they do it. And
Hmm.
so that's something, again, the benefit of owning your own business. You want to do contract, do it. Perm, do it. Tech, accounting, engineering, HR, like
Yeah.
there's no limits to it. If you want to do it, do it.
Yeah.
And I love working with you, Sharon. Because you started this model recently within the last year, but in my time here, at no point in time have I heard you tell anybody, "I want you to do this" or "You need to do this." You want people who work for the finders to have that freedom and flexibility, and I think you've done a great job with that. Again, even in my past in this model, there's times where the leadership will come in and say, like, "This isn't working, so you need to shift over here." Well, that takes away the independent part of it. And
Yeah.
so even within this model, there can be confines of it, but that's why I say know what you want to do, have your brand, and pursue that, go after it. But you've got to be diligent with it. Put those boundaries around yourself so that you can attack it and be successful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's gonna take anybody 3 to 6 months, right, to really feel like you got your feet under you, and that's anywhere. If I just go from this agency to another agency, it's going to be 3 to 6 months. But shifting from an agency to this model, especially, give it 3 to 6 months where you're focused, dedicated, you're putting everything you can into it. It's easy to say in 3 months, like, man, I don't have success, I quit. but you can't do it. If
Yeah.
you've had success in this industry, in this business, you can be successful in this model. You just got to make those adjustments. Connect with people who can help you. Anybody can do it. If you've been successful in recruitment, you can be successful in this model.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like one of the advantages of working in this type of model is that, and you talked about this just now, is you can do contract. Like one of the great things about instead of, if you're thinking about starting your own business or joining like an existing business with a brand that's been, like we're going on 27 years now.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to join an existing brand and just kind of like,
Yes.
step into it and just hit the ground running versus, and I know this personally because I've, restructured and sometimes it's like starting all over. And even with this new brokerage model, there's a lot of time, attention, operational things that not only have to start in the beginning, but there are things that continually come up. So it's like your time, if someone loves recruiting and loves working with clients and you're starting your own business, there's a lot of other things that you don't really realize you have to do until you
Yeah.
start, you're in it and then you're like, oh, I have to do all of this accounting and operations stuff and,
Yep.
you know, management and leadership and, there's a lot that goes with it. And
Yep.
so, a few of our team members have been ones where they had their own company and they're like, I don't like any of this. I don't like
Yeah.
micromanaging team and having to hire my own team. I like hiring for other, clients, but which it's very different, when you're hiring for your own
Yes.
team and onboarding and training and everything, it can be very overwhelming. And that's really why, like, I personally wanted to put something together like this brokerage model. So it takes all of that away and someone can just step in and just do what they love, which we all, if we're in recruiting, we love it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it
Right.
anymore because of all
Right.
the challenges and, the roller coaster. But if you're in it and you love it, it's like that's what you want to be doing most of the time, So I
Yeah.
think this is a good option. And also, too, the contract side, I was talking to someone yesterday, and that's a big thing. Like, if you're able to step into an opportunity where you can do contract staffing so easily and all of it is taken care of for you on the
Yes.
back end, um, it's a win. So,
Yeah. And it's
um, yeah, go ahead,
interesting,
James.
kind of exactly what you're saying. Going
Yeah.
back to one of the first questions you asked me, what was hard when you started your own business? One of the hardest things for me was just coming up with a name for my business. It took me weeks to figure out, something. It's like you want something unique, something creative, but something personal, and it took me a couple weeks to figure that out. But then to have to come up with a logo for it, and if you put in 2 weeks of that, it's like, well, how much money could I have made? Did I lose out on making because I spent 2 weeks focusing on this?
Yeah.
But when you come to a model like ours, you don't have any of that. You come in
Yeah.
day one and you just start selling and do what you're good at. And to your
Yeah.
point, like you can spend so much time going down these paths that don't make you any money, that don't bring in any
It's
success.
totally true. And at first it sounds fun and exciting, because I
Absolutely.
know we've changed our logo a couple times. I'm like, this is so fun. Like but you can kind of go down the rabbit hole where you do the logo and then you need to do the website. And if you have a
Yep.
website, then you need to change it. And like you can literally, look back over a month's period and be like, okay, what did I do that was actually producing my
Yes.
income? Right?
Yeah.
You're like, this just starts out fun. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, like, now I need to get going here. So,
Definitely.
okay, good. Well, what else? Like, are there any other tips? Like, if someone is getting started on their own or with a brokerage model, like, what tips would you give someone that, is trying to get to the next level in recruiting?
I would say again to kind of go back to what we talked about before. You've got to stay focused on what you're good at, right? And coming into it, you have to know your strengths. For me, my strength getting into recruitment was my accounting and finance experience, and so that's what a couple different agencies saw. Like, hey, this guy knows accounting and finance. I wanted to move into tech about 6 years into recruitment. I just saw the potential on the tech side, so I wanted to move into tech, and it was tough. learning things. I remember one of my first calls. I was selling a software engineer, and I sold it as C pound. I said, "Yeah, I've got this candidate. They've got C pound experience," and the guy's like, "What? What? C sharp?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Yep, C sharp." And it just you learn things the hard way. But I wasn't good at tech. I had never done tech, and it took me a long time to really get my feet under me on the tech side. And now again over the years, it's like I've thought about getting into engineering, because all of these industries are cyclical, right? And it's like, okay, engineering's hot right now. I want to go into that path. Healthcare is hot. I'm going to get into healthcare. And again, what we're saying, you can get pulled into so many different directions. But coming into something like this, know what you're good at and stick with that. As you get your feet under you in a new environment, under a new setting, when you start having success doing tech or doing accounting and finance, now I can branch off into healthcare if I want to add that. But making such a transition into a model like this or starting your own firm, know what you're good at and stick with that. Otherwise, you're going to overwhelm yourself and you're going to want to quit pretty fast.
Yeah. What do you think? Because, there's people that are really great at recruiting, and then there's some that tend to love business development more. And then there's some that, want to do both sides of the desk. Like, which have you seen out of those three? Like, what do you feel has been most successful in what you've seen thus far, or does it matter?
No, that's a great point too. If you want to be just a recruiter or just sales, you can't do that on your own, right? You got to have both sides of it to be successful in your own business. But when you come into a brokerage model like this, you can pick one or the other and have success at it. Now, for me, I've been more on the sales side most of my career. A lot of times I have run a full desk, but even when I'm running a full desk, I've noticed the bulk of my time, probably 75% of my time, is on sales. And I found most people are going to be that way. It's hard to find somebody who's a true 50-50 split. I'm going to tell people all day long, you should be in sales because you can go after your targets. You develop relationships with candidates and you turn them into clients. When you do reference calls, I take reference calls and I turn them into clients every time, or I try to anyway. My approach is always going to be sales, sales, sales. But there's so many people who I think get in their own way and say I can't do sales, and it goes back to the fact if you're recruiting, you're still selling. But you're selling the opportunity to a candidate now. It's just a different side. So in this model, I think it's helpful to be able to do both because there's times where I sell for 75% of the time, but even in this model, if I'm not just getting the support, right, the recruiters don't have time, their plates are full. I've got to sometimes jump on my own recs and recruit on them. And so I've got that flexibility to do that. Again, I haven't had that at every agency I've been at. So you got to shift with it, but I think it goes into to know who you are. If you're a great recruiter and the sales scares you, come to a brokerage model like this where you can recruit and let the sales guys bring in jobs. The problem is when you only do one is you're reliant on somebody else. And so that's hard. When I do sales, there's been times where I'm just not getting any coverage. And it's like, man, let me go recruit now for a while. But it takes me away what I'm really good at. And then vice versa. If the recruiters are really good at sourcing, man, I got to go find my own jobs because the sales guys aren't bringing me any recs to work on. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question.
Yeah.
I guess I'm shedding some light on the different sides to it. But you gotta figure out who you are, and really go after it. What model will work well for you based on what you're good at?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, go stay with your strengths.
Yeah,
But I will say, yeah, if you're able to do both, you're unstoppable because you don't have
absolutely.
to rely on, it's great to have that support system, but if you need to, you can jump in and you can make that placement with, on your own, and
Yes.
keep all the commission. So,
Right.
yeah, that's the deadly combination. If you are able to do both, and like you said, I've always, felt like you can recruit and get business development done at the same time just by star
Absolutely.
marketing and having those conversations with candidates that could also be clients down the road. And it could be 5 years. I mean, I got a call yesterday from a new client, and he was referred to me by someone that I mean, it's been like almost probably 20 years. They were a client like a very long time ago. So everything that you do, and I think this is just a good reminder for all of us, like everything that you do, it might not be right now, but it will come back like years
Yes.
later if you stick with it and, just be authentic and do your best and keep learning. So if you don't feel strong enough on sales, then practice,
Yeah.
so that you can do both if necessary, right? With
Yep.
this crazy market, if you know that you're unstoppable and you can jump in where you need to and get it done, then nothing will stop you. So,
Absolutely. And to your
yeah.
point, do the right thing. Do the right
Yeah.
thing. I like that.
Always.
Just like I've built my business on relationships. I am not a transactional guy. I'm not trying to just close this one deal and then you never hear from me again. I want to build a relationship. I want to build a true partnership with the companies that I work with and with the candidates that I work with. And if you do that, to your point, you get those calls 20 years later of, hey, do you
Mm-hmm.
remember me? Like, I don't, but if you do the right thing, it's going to come back to you. And I'll be honest, I've not done the right thing 100% of the time. There's times where I've gone down the wrong path and made bad decisions, and it comes back to get you. But by and large, I try to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
and if you do that, and that's something I love with the finders too. Sharon, you look for people who are going to do the right thing, not just people who make a lot of money, not just people who can bring in a lot of deals. No, we want the right people, and again, that's what I love with this model. If there's somebody who I don't necessarily click with, great, I don't have to work with them. Like, I don't sit in an office with them. I don't have to work deals with them. I'll go work with people who I do mesh better with. So I'm not sure what prompted me down that. Most of our
Yeah.
people, as far as I know, we do the right thing. We bring in people who are going to do the right thing. So we'll just keep doing that,
Yeah.
and we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, no, and I mean, like a career is a long period of time. And like I look back, you're always growing and you're always learning. And even if something's not intentional, like hindsight's always better. Like you look back and go, I really could have handled that situation differently. And I still do that. I'm like, I'm like, should I learn? Should I have learned by now? Like doing this for so
Yeah.
long, like, but I think, and we're also really hard on ourselves too. So I think it's easy to like, sometimes we have to give ourselves grace, and I think
Yeah.
like the intention is always there, to do the right thing and just to be that provider of, a great experience for anyone, whether it's a team member, a candidate or a client. But yeah, it's definitely hindsight. You look back and go, okay, well, what am I going to do differently like the next time in this situation? Because I mean, I
Yes.
still do that to this day. And, but we're human, so we're learning and
Absolutely.
learning and growing every day until we, can't anymore. So,
Yep.
but Brian, thank you so much for coming on. This was
Yeah.
great. I
Been
loved
fun.
chatting with you. And I'll put your information in our show notes. So if
Yeah.
anyone's like interested or has questions for you, that's probably the best place, like LinkedIn, I would say,
Yes.
just to
I
reach out to you there.
I love pouring into other people. Again, at this point in my career, I don't want to just make money for myself. I want to help people grow and help people develop. I love that. So, yeah, please, if anybody's interested in talking with me, learning more about my story, come work for the Finders, and then I can give you all the time you need. But I'm happy to jump on a call with anyone. Share my story and help out in any way I can.
Sounds great. All right. Until next time, make it a great week and we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Thanks for joining me today. I would love to hear what resonated with you or suggestions for a future show. Connect with me on LinkedIn and be sure to sign up for our monthly newsletter. All the links are in the show notes. And if you or someone you know is an amazing recruiter and is looking to join my brokerage recruiting model for more time, freedom, and money, let's chat.